Hello, my name is Jesse Valentin. I am the Community Programs and Engagement Social Worker for the Center for Victims of Torture in St. Paul, Minnesota. This presentation is on the topic of strategies for trauma-informed community living. So before we begin, I would like to provide a brief history about the Center for Victims of Torture. CVT, as we call it, was founded in 1985. The Center for Victims of Torture works towards a future in which torture ceases to exist and its survivors have hope for a new life. CVT is an international nonprofit dedicated to healing survivors of torture and violent conflict. CVT provides direct care for those who have been tortured, trains partners around the world who can prevent and treat torture, and advocates for human rights and the end of torture worldwide. Since our founding in 1985, CVT has helped to rehabilitate over 33,000 torture and war trauma survivors through direct healing, utilizing various modalities, including psychotherapy, group therapy, case management, workshops and presentations, physiotherapy, massage, acupuncture, nursing, music and movement, yoga, and peer support groups, amongst others. CVT is engaged in post-conflict community building after some of the world's deadliest wars, including working in Ethiopia, Uganda, Guinea, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Democratic Republic of Congo, Jordan, Kenya, the southern US-Mexico border, and additional project sites around the world. We do not share where these sites are located for the safety and security of our CVT staff and the survivors we provide care for. CVT has pioneered research in torture survivor rehabilitation to better understand the effects of torture and how to best support and heal survivors. These are some images from CVT locations. The picture of the yellow house on the right-hand top corner is the St. Paul Healing Center. Since we opened this location, we have expanded in the Twin Cities and have a program called Healing Hearts that serves the Southeast Asian refugee population. We have a multidisciplinary clinic in St. Cloud that provides care to East Africans and a program in Atlanta, Georgia that supports East, West, and Central Africans and Middle Eastern asylum seekers and refugees. So we will now begin discussing the topic of community living. Before we begin, let's first ground ourselves in the present moment and state these 5 facts. You are a survivor. You are a valued resident of the community that you live in. Living with others can be challenging. Living with others can be wonderful. Learning to live harmoniously with others takes effort. Patience, compassion, understanding, and having an open heart are some of the pathways towards harmonious community living. This information can be helpful to learn skills and new ways of communicating when living with others. Everyone wants to live in a space that feels safe and secure and with people who are friendly and compassionate. Trauma causes fractures in a person's ability to trust others, to feel safe, and makes it very difficult to talk or spend time with others as you once had before the traumatic event occurred. We're going to start with an overview. What are we going to discuss today? What is trauma? How do people react to trauma? How does trauma affect one's self-worth, ability to trust, ability to build relationships, and the ability to become part of a community and build kinship bonds? What is trauma? Trauma is stressful and distressing experiences or exposure to emotionally disturbing or life-threatening events. Trauma has lasting effects on our physical body, the way that we socialize with others, our emotional well being, as well as our spiritual well being. Trauma is a situation or event where a person simply cannot cope with. It causes an extreme state of fear. It could be from imminent death, destruction of a physical place, such as a natural disaster, physical harm that has happened to you or somebody that you love, or mental or psychological harm. So, how do people react to trauma? Well, there is no one way that people react, but there are some common reactions that people have. I love this quote. It says, "Trauma is not a disorder, but a reaction to a kind of wound." This is important to remember that there is nothing wrong with you because you've experienced traumatic events. There is nothing wrong with you for reacting or responding in the way that you have. Some common physical reactions to trauma are trouble eating, difficulty sleeping, your heart racing, having a severe headache, having chest pains also is another one, excessively smoking or drinking to deal with trauma, and often medical problems that people have worsen after a traumatic event. Some emotional troubles, nervousness, helplessness, fearfulness, avoiding people or specific places, having anger outbursts, blaming oneself for the traumatic event that happened, having a negative view on the world, being distrustful of others or withdrawn, and having a loss of intimacy or the inability to build intimate and close relationships. So you may have asked yourself these questions before. Why can't I just get over it? Why can't I move on? I want to move on, but it keeps coming up for me. Am I crazy? What is wrong with me? You're not alone, and your reactions to trauma are more common than you may realize. These reactions are caused from neurological responses in our brain that are beyond our control. Even though these reactions occur, understanding why you feel the way you do, why you act the way that you do, is important in helping to regain a sense of control over yourself and over your life. What you are experiencing is normal, and you are not reacting irrationally. Now we're going to talk about self-worth. Before a traumatic life experience happens, you believe that you have the ability to make good decisions. You have control over the environment that you live in. You know how to keep yourself safe. After a traumatic event happens, it smashes those beliefs that you have control or that you can make good decisions or that you can control the environment that you're in. A new belief form. And it often causes people to feel like they can't count on their own judgment or their own ability to make good decisions. Oftentimes, people experience frequent and intense feelings of vulnerability or fearfulness, questioning one's own decisions. A common way to try and reduce or manage this increased sense of vulnerability and fearfulness is to increase your sense of responsibility and control. Oftentimes, this will come up in work settings. People will take on additional responsibilities, maybe work 2 or 3 jobs to try to avoid thinking about the traumatic event that happened, to increase control in one area of your life, because it then can offset the lack of control or perceived control that you may have in other areas of your life. The important thing to remember is that your self-worth, you can work to repair and get back to the state that you once felt, which was that you do have the ability to make good decisions, you are in control of your environment, and you can do things to help yourself feel more safe. It is easy to believe that your actions cannot change or influence things, or that you cannot control your fate, because there were forces beyond your control that took away your sense of safety. But it is possible to regain that sense of safety and control. So, how does self worth and low self worth affect trust and relationships? So, when you have low self worth after a traumatic event happens, if you have low self worth, you may try to control all facets of your life, scheduling every minute of the day, micromanaging the lives of those around you. This often happens with mothers and fathers with their children because they experience the traumatic event. They may be fearful for their children when they leave the house to go to school or to go to a sports practice. And so checking in with those people more often than you maybe normally would have, that would be considered micromanaging the lives of those around you. It also could be establishing impossible standards of perfection on yourself or on those around you. This comes at a high psychological cost. The excessive activities exhaust the body, the mind, and the spirit. Having excessive expectations leads to harsh criticisms of ourselves and the loved ones that we have in our lives. And even though these efforts at increasing a sense of control are entirely understandable, they do not lead to the desired outcome and often cause you to try and control more elements of your life. Not only does a control agenda not deliver the safety and security you're trying to achieve, but this approach has a high psychological cost. What I mean by that is it's exhausting mentally. It causes the brain to work very hard. It also exhausts the body. If you're working constantly, if you're managing and scheduling every minute of your day, there is no time for the body, the mind, or the spirit to relax. The damage that trauma exacts upon the self-esteem also feeds into a harshness and self-hatred that frequently arises. It is common to believe that if I had only been smarter, if I had only been faster, if I had only fought harder or yelled louder, or simply just not been in that place at that time, the trauma would not have occurred. But what's important to remember is you are not at fault for the traumatic situation that happened or the situation where you were tortured. You are the survivor. You were the victim in that situation, and only the perpetrator had control over that situation. It can be hard to remember that you now have control over your life. So, what are some ways to build self-worth after a traumatic event occurs? Practicing daily self-love is one of the best ways to do this. Give yourself time every single day to create goals for yourself. It's important to also not hide from those that love you, whether it's housemates, friends, or family. Spending time with others is an act of self-love. It feeds the social need to be around others and to be a part of a community. Give yourself breaks and focus on self-care activities when needed, whether this taking a bath or journaling, drawing, going for a walk, going to church, going to mosque, be a variety of things. It's important to learn to say no respectfully. If you are feeling burned out, exhausted, and somebody comes to you with a request and you don't have energy or a desire to participate in the request, it's important to say no. Those healthy boundaries help us to have stronger and better relationships. Healthy boundaries regarding triggering topics is really important. Sometimes people bring up a topic that brings us back to a previous experience that we had. An example of this could be If you're in the kitchen and people come in and they start talking about politics and war in your that are happening in your home country, you could feel activated and become very stressed out. There are a few options for how you could respond to this situation. For instance, if you need to be using the kitchen because you're cooking something or preparing food, and the residents who walked in are not yet preparing food, you could say to them, what you're talking about is triggering to me. It makes me sad, angry, scared, and worried for my family back home. Could you please go to a different room to talk about this or wait until I'm done cooking to continue this conversation? So healthy boundaries, they can help us develop self-worth and confidence in ourselves. It helps us to say no more easily. It helps us to have direct conversations more easily. Developing boundaries helps to protect ourselves from triggering topics, places, relationship dynamics, or avoiding certain events we know are going to cause us stress or anxiety. So another situation that may come up is you're sitting in a common living space. A resident, a friend of yours, may come up and talk to you. And they could start talking about something that is stressful, that causes sadness or anger or worry. A response, a direct response that states your boundary would be, I prefer to not talk about this. And hopefully the other person responds in kindness and changes the topic. Your choices at that point are to stay in the room and engage in a new conversation, leave the room, or and do a different activity. Or if the person does not respect your boundary and wants to continue having that conversation, you could reassert your boundary and say, as I have said before, this topic is really hard for me to talk about, and I don't want to talk about it. If the person is insistent, that is when it would be important to bring this to a staff member at the place that you live, and they can intervene and help to resolve the situation. Sometimes it can be too difficult to place those boundaries in place on your own. It's okay to ask for help. So, what does it mean to build relationships after trauma? Here's a quote from Zala Ali, a psychotherapist at CBT. The issue with the trauma remains on your brain. It remains in your memory until you process it, until you deal with it. Feeling confident in having a mutual understanding and care for one another is really important for trauma survivors. If we do not share what is difficult for us, we cannot be good and helpful to one another. People tend to be more cooperative with each other and are more willing to make compromises when they understand one another. At the bottom of the triangle is trust, communication, security, compassion, and honesty. This is the foundation for all healthy relationships. Once you've been able to establish those five things, it is much easier then to move to the next tier of the triangle, which includes accountability, commitment, and responsibility. After those have been established within a relationship, emotional intimacy can occur. That is the deepest type of a relationship with another person. Say you have a best friend and you think fondly of that person when they come up in your mind, that you think of experiences you've had together, trust that you've built together, times when you've been compassionate and caring to one another, maybe safety or security that you've established within your relationship. That relationship and that positive association with it is only possible because you've established those other pieces first. Now we're going to watch a short film about trauma triggers.
Finding the right treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder is one thing, but what about supporting someone through the treatment process and beyond? Here to share supporter strategies for your loved one with PTSD is Dr. Judith Joseph. We were talking off camera. Obviously, PTSD is not a ha light topic, but it is nice to have some levity in these conversations. And you've just been such a dream to work with today. So thank you for giving us a little peaks and valleys here, so it's not just
thank you.
PTSD. So once a loved one is diagnosed and receiving treatment, what are the triggers that a supporter should look out for or avoid?
So I always warn people that things may get worse before they're getting better. And it makes sense. If you have been through something terrible and this is your first time in treatment or second or third time in treatment and you're talking about it, you're rehashing this, sometimes you will shut down. Sometimes these old behaviors will return, not opening the door, not eating, sleeping differently, or just being on edge or irritable. And so, yes, things may get worse before they get better. However, things will get better with time if you've had success in the past.
Why is that? Why do they get worse?
Because when you're exposed to something that is so terrifying, your body reacts. And we talked about the part of the brain, the amygdala, and its hyperactivity in people with PTSD and how it's screaming and shouting like, run for the hills. And your body listens to that amygdala, and you can have the physiological sweating, the heart racing, the breathing fast. And so the person logically knows that, okay, they're not in a dangerous situation, but their body is telling them another thing. And it's very uncomfortable for that person and exhausting. So they will shut down. And so the supporters, the loved ones, should look for signs of exhaustion, someone shutting down, someone not being a part of family life, of home life, as they used to, and also reassuring them that, it's going to be okay. This is expected. Things will get better.
How do the triggers change over time while the PTSD patient is in treatment?
So, we all have a fluid lifestyle. So, for example, I gave you the story about the child who her trauma happened at school. And when we removed her from the school setting, things got better. And then, down the road, we thought that she had successfully completed the cognitive behavioral therapy and was on the right regimen. And we thought, let's see if she can handle school again. And I warned everyone, she will most likely start shutting down. And we expect this because she's going back to school, not the same school, a different one, but just the thought of returning to an environment where something potentially could happen, or something that reminds you of something bad that did happen, can set her off. So let's all go in eyes wide open with realistic expectations and know that we'll get through it together because the treatment worked before. So there's no reason to believe that it won't work again.
So then what happened with her? She went to the new school?
She was re-triggered. So she shut down initially, grades decline, and we used some of those coping skills. We ramped up therapy. So rather than once a week, we did several times weekly. We incorporated the teachers, the counselor in school, so that if she needed a break, she had someone to turn to. And things worked out in that case.
So she was able to
successfully reintegrate into the school system, a different school, but she was able to overcome those initial triggers and stay in school.
Do you have to face your triggers?
So a part of cognitive behavioral therapy is called exposure therapy.
Yes.
So the more that you hide from the thing that terrifies you, the stronger that fear becomes in the brain. It becomes more prominent in the brain. And so the more that you're able to challenge this notion that this scary thing will lead to this, and to face the fear and to overcome that hump of, okay, this area was scary for me. I was able to face it and I survived. Nothing bad happened. I didn't die. That tells your brain that actually this thing isn't going to kill you. And that fear center shrinks. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
We talk about exposure therapy a lot in our series with Dr. Jenny Yip on OCD and how that is a common treatment method. So it would make sense that this also would address fear in that way and be successful.
Yeah.
What are the
All right. So The doctor was able to explain a little bit about post-traumatic stress disorder, which is common after a traumatic experience. And she explained how exposure to what is most scary to us actually is the best treatment in many cases. So when living with others, conflict can happen. And so let's talk about that. So conflict makes it really hard for people to feel safe. And then the number one reason conflict occurs in community living settings is because somebody disengages in a conversation or ignores the other person. So let's think about ways to respond compassionately. So if you notice someone is ignoring you or others when having a conversation, or is walking away from a conversation while it's still happening, being easily startled or frightened, always being on guard for danger, having trouble sleeping, trouble concentrating, irritability, having anger outbursts, or it seems like they're having overwhelming guilt or shame. You can communicate your support by using non-judgmental language. I have 3 examples here that we're going to review. It looks like talking with me is really hard for you right now. My feelings are not hurt, and I will respect what you need from me, even if you would feel better if I leave. I will check in with you tomorrow or earlier if you would like. This could be used if somebody is ignoring you when you're trying to have a conversation with them. You could write this down and leave it at their door or slide it under their door if they have walked away from your conversation. Another example of communicating support and using non-judgmental language. I know sometimes you get overwhelmed or angry and want some time alone. I don't take it personally and hope you will come talk when you are ready. I just want you to know that I'm here for you in whatever way feels best. This is a response you could give if you're having a conversation with somebody and they respond angrily, aggressively, or irritably. Another example. I noticed that you walked away from our conversation earlier. Did I do something to upset you? Can we talk about it now so we can understand each other better? This is a great example of a way to communicate the situation that happened, because it is rude to walk away from a conversation. But if you don't ask if there was something that you did to upset the other person or something that you said that was triggering to them, you will never know what you can do to repair the relationship. The second part of the question statement says, can we talk about it now so we can understand each other better? At this point, you've given them time to think about the situation and you're returning to it. This is helpful because usually a person's guard will be down once the situation's over and they're no longer angry or irritable. Oftentimes, people try to resolve a situation in the moment, and that is not always the best way to go about it because triggers are happening, right? That post-traumatic response is going on. Sometimes patience is the best and most compassionate thing that you can give another person. Acute stress and its effect on community living. So generally speaking, people, immigrants, asylees, asylum seekers, and refugees that are living in community settings are under acute stress. Acute stress just means an intense amount of stress. Lots of things on your mind, lots of things going on. A lot of unknowns with your immigration case, with regard to maybe you're waiting for a work permit to arrive. Maybe you don't have your own transportation yet and you're taking the bus or the train, and that's stressful. Maybe it's triggering to you. Not having your own money, that is another thing that a lot of people struggle with. Not having the same amount of personal space or personal time that you once had. So I have 3 steps that are really helpful when communicating under stress. Speaking carefully, being specific, speaking less to say more. This may sound confusing, but it's part of being specific. So if you have a frustration that you need to communicate with somebody, you would communicate the specific situation, and it would be easier for the other person to listen and respond. For example, if somebody left dirty dishes in the kitchen and they didn't put them in the dishwasher, the way that's not very effective would be to say, why is the kitchen so messy? Can't you just clean up after yourself? A better way would be to say, I noticed that you cooked in the kitchen earlier and you left a pot, some pans, and some silverware next to the sink. Could you please put those in the dishwasher so other people can use those dishes later? The second part, listen patiently. Listen to listen rather than listening to respond. Taking criticism to improve yourself and your relationship. So if you were the person that left the dirty dishes in the kitchen next to the sink, instead of thinking about the best way to respond, just listening to what the other person has to say is really important. And then taking that criticism to improve yourself and your relationship is one of the best ways to have a harmonious community living. So number 3, responding wisely. You can voice your opinion, show self-love and compassion. This can be done, for example, by saying, I hear what you're saying. I understand I broke the rules of the house. I didn't do my dishes, even though I knew I was supposed to do them right away. Unfortunately, I had an appointment I was running late for, and I didn't have time to do them. I will try better next time to schedule enough time to clean up before I go to an appointment. So in that situation, both people have stated what they need, as well as why the situation happened the way that it did. And it opens up a pathway forward so people understand that it wasn't out of carelessness for other people that the dishes were left unwashed. It was simply because somebody didn't have enough time. And then the person responded with what they can do better next time. And that is the end of this presentation. What I have for you here is information about Asylum interview preparation, as well as mental health resources. You can scan the QR code to access accurate information about the U.S. immigration asylum interview process, as well as helpful mental health coping strategies and skills. It would be very helpful if you could complete a post survey. This survey will take 5 minutes to complete. Surveys help CBT to understand the ways we can support communities and individuals. All responses will be anonymous. You can use the QR code to access the survey. Please select the survey titled Trauma Informed Community Living Survey. Thank you very much.